Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another video. If you are new here, my name is Teal Garcia, and on this channel we talk about everything related to photography. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you should probably subscribe. Okay, today's topic is something that comes up a lot, especially when you are learning. We're going to talk about blurry or out of focus photos, not having sharp photos. That's it, not having sharp photos. The first reason your photo might not be sharp, or your photos, whichever you have questions about, the first reason why your photos might not be sharp is your shutter speed is too low. So when you are learning photography, nailing your exposure triangle is one of the most important things, in understanding what each setting does to kind of balance each other out. And in that triangle, your shutter speed is probably the most important setting. Sure, the other ones you can work around, but shutter speed is super important. Having your shutter speed too low will absolutely kill the sharpness of your photo. You will get motion blur. Even if your subject is perfectly still, your hands tend to move a little bit. I don't know your life, but unless you're a surgeon as your side gig, then I'm guessing you don't have super steady hands. So my rule of thumb is 1/250 for shutter speed. And that's only because it's a good solid number to go off of. It's an easy one to remember. So if you are adjusting your settings as you are shooting and you seem to hit 250 and your photos maybe are a little too dark, mess with another setting instead. Mess with your ISO or whatever to make sure you don't have to go under 250 with your shutter speed. So if you do have photos that are blurry, or if you noticed that when a kid was like running, their photos are blurry, or if you're taking pictures of like sporting events, anything like that, and you notice your photos aren't super sharp, take a look at that. Take a look and see if your shutter speed is low. So obviously 250 is just kind of the baseline. If you're taking pictures of something moving super fast, then you might have to go higher, but that's just my bottom line. I do not let my camera go under 1/250. The next one that may cause blurry or not sharp photos could be your ISO being too high. ISO, I don't know. It's the sensitivity to your sensor, whichever you want to call it. I've always called it ISO, but some people say ISO. So having this number too high, you are letting a lot of light in. So let's say you're taking pictures and it's really dark. You keep upping your ISO to let more light in to make the photos lighter. Well, this isn't necessarily going to make your photos out of focus, but depending on your camera model, not all cameras can handle high ISO numbers. So if you are taking pictures and your ISO is really high, you will get home and notice that a lot of your photos are very grainy. So yes, it can be fixed a little bit just depending on how bad it is, but so your photos aren't necessarily out of focus, but your photos aren't going to be tack sharp either. The grain will affect that. So take a look at that. I'd say like most entry-level cameras, you probably shouldn't go above maybe like 2000, 2500 ISO, and then like the higher end, I don't know, it depends on if you're going mirrorless or high-end DSLR, I don't know, but usually on a beginner camera, under 2000 is probably your best bet. The next one is that you just simply missed focus. A lot of missed focus has to do with how you have your focus settings. So obviously we use autofocus. There's no need to manually focus, especially if your subject's moving. Manual focus is a little bit crazy. But what I'm talking about is you can go into your camera and you can select certain focus settings. So me, for instance, I always pick like one point. Right in the middle of my lens, that's where I think it's the sharpest. And I focus there, and I focus on my subject, and I recompose. A lot of people, especially when they are kind of just getting started, they don't really know about it yet, and when you go to focus on something in your camera, you'll notice all of your focus points are lit up. And this is great. So new cameras especially have tons and tons of focus points. This is great. However, having all of those focus points turned on, and on auto at that, you're letting your camera decide where it's going to focus. So if you're taking a picture of something and let's say something is in front of another something, your camera tends to focus on what is closest. So if it's, let's say it's a mom and her baby sitting in front of her, your camera will tend to just focus on the baby's face and not the mom's, or vice versa. And there's other settings that go involved in getting them both in focus. However, your camera will automatically decide usually to put what is closest to your lens in focus. Going into your settings, again, I don't know what camera everybody's using. It would be really hard to explain how to do that, but going in and choosing your focus points and maybe putting them on manual focus points instead, to where you select what you're going to use. I can do a whole video about that kind of thing. If you want me to, let me know in the comments. But selecting your focus points manually is going to make sure, give you a little more control and make sure that you can get in focus what you want in focus. Okay, the last one that I am noticing more and more. So when you start photography and you start looking at lenses, and the ideal is always to have a creamy, dreamy background. Well, having a creamy, dreamy background, everybody tends to shoot too wide open. So your aperture is too low. And the reason being, so I get that everybody, everybody tells you go out and buy this 50mm 1.8 lens, and then the 1.8 is going to give you this beautiful, dreamy background. However, what they failed to mention is that that 1.8 is so shallow that pretty much whatever you're focused on is all that's going to be in focus. So again, two people not being close enough on the same plane, one's going to be in focus and the other one's not. It's just a lot harder to nail your focus because you have such a narrow window to get what you want in focus. So I recommend upping your aperture just a little bit. Let's say, for example, I shoot with a 35mm 1.4 lens most of the time. Unless it is one single person and it is a shot that I am set up for, I do not shoot on 1.4. I shoot, let's say a family of 4, for example, I would shoot between 2.8 and 4.0. Just to make sure I get a lot more in focus. Having a low aperture is not the only way to get a blurry background. I actually have a video coming up, I think next week, about all the ways to get a blurry background. Having a low aperture is not the only way to get a blurry background. Play with that. If you look and you did a whole shoot and your aperture was at 1.8 and nothing seems to be working, nothing seems to be in focus, nothing seems to be tack sharp, it might just be as simple as that. You missed focus because that layer of focus, that plane of focus that you have, you just missed it. It was too narrow. So it's definitely something you have to play with, but yeah. All right, that is all I have. I hope that answered some questions for you. If you are learning, those are all things to keep in mind. There is a lot that goes into photography. There's a lot that goes into getting really, really sharp photos. I love a good sharp photo, but it takes practice, so don't get down on yourself. If you have any questions or want any follow-up information on anything that I talked about, let me know in the comments. I will see you next time. Bye.